Okay. Yes. Page down. There we go. The hummingbird, a root of effervescence with a revolving wheel, a resonance of emerald and a rush of cochineal. And every blossom on the bush adjusts its tumbled head. The mail from Tunis, probably an easy morning's ride. Emily Dickens penned this in 1880. And it's interesting, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, that this line, the mail from Tunis, is quite an interesting one for her to have added, because at that time she didn't realize that there's quite a history of the movement of hummingbirds in the world. Our outline tonight is going to cover what is a hummingbird, their evolution. We're going to introduce you to 10 species, only 10, with some detail. And then we're going to go into the research that we have come across. We're going to look at how they developed a taste for sweet, their pollination through nectar gathering. They are nectivores, their iridescence, their courtship, and then their energy needs and torpor. So what is a hummingbird? Bob's going to start you off on this part of the talk, and we will go from back and forth and do a little dance.
Okay, I want to join with Dana in welcoming you here. This is such a great place to come. We've come here, given many talks. We've given talks other places, but this is one of the places we most like to come back to, a great audience and a great hall to do things in. Now, we're going to present a lot of information about hummingbirds up here. Your idea is to sort of get these all sort of in your head, and you go away, we hope, with a larger picture. But there's some things you won't understand possibly, and so we'll have questions at the end. I even have a question for you folks at the end. So that's the way we'll sort of work through this thing today. Now, as you can see by what's up here on the screen, I will take what's on the screen, but I will also augment it by some other little notes I'm going to throw in. It's a member, this hummingbirds are a member of a family of birds. They're diverse, small, colorful, nectar feeding, that's important, and rapid wing beats. That's an interesting thing to talk about, only found in the Americas today. Now, how do I move it forward here?
All right. Why don't you just stand and talk, and I'll take care of this, okay? Good.
We usually talk about that picture. Anyway.
Well, I think we'll just hit enter. There we go. Hummingbirds today. Here you go.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, right now, as you can tell by what you can see on the screen, there's 352 species known today, or at least in 2011. They changed because they've been increasing in number. They are divided into clades or groupings, and they've been grouped into 9 different kinds of clades or groupings, and they're listed here. The names won't mean much to you, but we're going to be showing you pictures of various ones. The topazes, hermits, mangoes, brilliants, coquettes, the big one, the giant hummingbird, mountain gems, and of course the bees and emeralds, which are the ones that are more familiar to us here in North America. Okay, we start with the size of the birds. I mean, hummingbirds, the bee hummingbird is only 2.5 inches long, if you can imagine what it is. The giant hummingbird is 8 inches long. It's a great difference in size. And the next thing is weight. They go from the little bee again, which is 2 grams, up to the largest one, which is about 20 grams. This isn't very much when you think of it. Hummingbird bills vary. I mean, a lot of you just think of a long bill, but they'll vary from very short types that you have like 8 millimeters long, all the way up to the one that you're going to see that I'll talk about in a minute. That's 119 inches, millimeters long. But that's about 4.5 inches. It's a huge bird. And right now, Dana is seeing about 218 of the species in the world, mainly here in North America and South America. And I've had 230. So you get some ideas. We've been around. Now, the tree of life is a good way to talk about any kind of a species. I want to show you a few things about this thing and sort of how it goes. The first thing, when you have a tree of life for a species or for anything, at the bottom is the numbers. The numbers don't show very well down the very bottom, but you can see these are the numbers of millions of years from when the bird started. So you can see, you go all the way over, and most of the birds are somewhere around 66 million years ago. See, with this a little arrow there, that's when most of the birds sort of started to evolve. But there were some other numbers in there. 48 is going to be a very fancy number for us. Also in here, you've got what they split from. And so we're going to enlarge this because it's a little hard. The arrow is there, but we're going to do
this is the enlargement, Bob. This is the enlargement. Okay, as you can see, the oldest birds are down at the bottom. So ostriches, those flightless birds, are the oldest. And you get up here to where the blue arrow is, and you can see that hummingbirds are just above swifts. So this is how the birds evolved. They went from the flightless birds, the ostriches, and eventually you can see the names of the different families of birds there. And the hummingbirds came from the swifts.
And you can see that if you follow that down to the bottom, you see that's about 48 million years ago when the two of them split. And that's how you figure. Just go down to the bottom of the chart and see that.
Now we're going to start on our personal journey, and Bob will talk to you about 10 of them, 5 of them, okay?
Okay, I have 5 and Dana has 5. They're all special for some particular reason. Then we're going to start working on the theory and a little more in depth. But the first thing is, as they all ended up in South America at one point, how they have become so many different varieties is the thing that I'm working on right now. First, how do the mountains in the Andes get formed? If you look at these pictures up here, you'll see that the continental crust of South America is moving to the left, and the small ocean crust is moving to the right. When they hit, obviously, it's like a Mack truck hitting a Volkswagen. The little guy gets driven down, but in coming together, they've squished the land. It's like squishing a rug. It forms sort of wrinkles and things. So a lot of these mountains are sets of wrinkles like that. But in addition, as the crust went, the little small crust went down, you can see on the right-hand picture there that it goes down and eventually it disappears. It melts, it becomes liquid, but you can see those little red bubbles going up, and what they represent is a material that's going to make a volcano. And so the mountains are formed by the compaction and the volcanoes that have been added to it by this effect.
So this gave great deal of habitat availability as every mountain was developed. And you can see it here just in this map of Colombia.
If you look at the things carefully, the left-hand picture is pretty good. You can see there's 3 ranges. The eastern one, which was formed first, then the central one, which is there, and then you can just barely figure out the western one. But there are 3 ranges up in Colombia. They all sort of meld as you get down farther south. But there's one odd little one up in the upper right-hand corner. If you look at the right-hand picture in the very north part of Colombia, there's a little block. And this is a crazy little block. But if you want to see hummingbirds, it's a place to go. What happened is a piece of the coastline took off and got drifted up and stuck on the northern part of Colombia. So that is a little island of mountains up there. And it's different from these, but the fact there are mountains means they're going to have a lot of hummingbirds. Now, my first one I'm going to talk about is the giant one. He's the biggest one, as we said. He's the only one in this particular clade, and he's the largest with 8 inches long, weighing more than most sparrows, sort of a weight of a sparrow. It lives in the Paramo up in the higher mountains, and it probably is the southernmost nester. This is the reason I picked it as one of my special ones. A second one is swordbill, and I got a couple of points I wanted to point out here. First, that it's got the longest bill of any hummingbird. One of the reasons I picked it. It's 10 centimeters long. You can see in the pictures how very long it is. It is widespread in the Andes, and it has caused an interesting thing to happen in the evolution. You're going to hear more about this, but what goes on is they were trying to decide how come that this particular hummingbird evolved 10.1 million years ago, and a lot of plants that had nectar in them evolved at the same time. And what this is, it's called combining the evolution and uniting evolution of plants and evolution of birds. The plants would say, we want to have more seeds spread. Okay, hummingbirds said, we'll spread the seeds, but we want you to have nectar. There's 7,000 plants, different species of plants that are providing nectar in this area called coevolution. Now, this is the third area that this is going to lead into the next plant we're talking about. Los Navegas is in the Paro. That means the high area. This particular area is 12,000 feet up in the central Andes of Colombia. And there's that white strips that were there. The main plants in there is varieties of this Espelita plant. Here's the place that we stayed, which is rather pretty. It's got cactus-like plants that are part of this thing, and some skinny plants too. And it gives you some idea of what the area is like. This is what we're talking about. This is one of several species that lives this high. This is very high in the thing. One of the things about it, it's in the clade of coquettes, if you want to know about the 99 symbols that it's in. But basically, it is in the Paramo, and it goes up to 17,000 feet. Now that's cold, very cold, and how it keeps warm is something that Dana will talk about later. This is called stupor, but I do want to comment about the fact that one of the things, besides getting nectar, they have to go and get insects, and the females will get 2,000 insects a day. You can't believe they do it. It was a freezing day when we were up there, but this is particular Buffy helmet crest. Now, I'm going to tell a story that's not on the script right here now, because this is one species. When we were down there, it was the only species. It's now been found not alone in the eastern, but the central and the western areas that are this high. This may mean that the bird is expanding its range, and maybe we're going to have 2 new species. Who knows? That's the way it works.
There are 4 now.
Okay, the rufous hummingbird, we were talking about that a few minutes ago. It has the longest migration route. That's the way I picked it, 3,900 miles. They go from, they can go through the western mountains of the US all the way up to southern Alaska. And then in the winter, they go down, most of them anyway, go down to areas south of Mexico City. That's the longest migration of any hummingbird. Most hummingbirds are in South America, and they don't have to migrate very far. They fly at 25 miles an hour, which is a pretty good speed for those. But one of the things that has been just found out very recently, it's turned up in a few magazines now, that the climate change is working. A team from Princeton went out to Colorado and watched these birds migrating through, and they always came in on a certain date, but they still do. However, the flowers that they had to feed on are flowering now 2 weeks beforehand. There's where climate change is taken in, and the rufous hasn't yet adjusted to it. My last bird here is our bird, the ruby-throated. One of the reasons it's 3 grams, 2.5 inches long, you all know what it is. But one of the things, it has the largest breeding area of any hummingbird. It's 2/3 of the United States, from the Atlantic coast all the way across to the Rockies. Most of them winter south of the Gulf of Mexico, so they have to get down there. But I want to talk about their migration because it's been going on several weeks right around you here, and you might want to have some idea of a little more of the details that have been worked out by people that have been watching banded hummingbirds and following them. The first thing is what caused them to start migrating, and this has been debatable. One theory is light. When the light changes to a certain amount, they think it's time to move. I'm more in favor of the fact that when they're looking around and the food that they've been feeding on starts to dry up, whether they're in the spring and they're down in the south or here in the north, when they start losing their food, I think that signals them to go. Now, how are they going to go? First, the males will leave. All of a sudden, they start to go. Now, of course, you may have a male leave and one show up as a feeder, because remember, they're coming down from north of you here. But basically, the males will leave first, then 12 days later, the females will leave. And 5 days after that, the young will leave. So they all go, they have to navigate all by themselves, and they're not even going with their friends. Now, they only travel about 23 miles a day, and you say, well, they can fly a lot faster than that. And it's true that they can, but they fly in a very fancy way that you might not think about. They have to have breakfast. So they'll feed early in the morning, as you probably know if you have a hummingbird feeder. Then they take off and will fly, but they don't fly high. They're only at treetop level, and they're looking down to see if there's any good food down underneath that they might, and they'll go down and have a quick snack. So they go along for 23 miles, we'll say, and then they have to come down and have supper. So they come down and spend the night, and it repeats. So they're flying at treetop level, and partly, I think, to see food on the ground.
So now we're going to have the changing of the guard, and I will start. We have a few, I think, wonderful videos, and this is the bee hummingbird. This is a member of the bee clade. It's the smallest, and it weighs less than a penny, and it's only found in Cuba.
The very smallest bird on Earth, the bee hummingbird. Barely larger than the bee it's named after, almost everything about this hummingbird is special. They can beat their tiny wings an incredible 80 times a second. Their tiny size makes them tasty prey for snakes, birds, even spiders. Nothing about the bee hummingbird's life is easy. They may visit over 1,000 flowers a day on their eternal quest for nectar. The males are the show-offs of the family. Their dazzling head feathers usually irresistible to the less colorful females. But this lady's showing no interest. She has already mated. For her, it's nesting time. The whole nest is smaller than a golf ball. The mother will lay 1 or 2 eggs the size of coffee beans. And then all she can do is wait. 3 weeks must pass before she'll know if all is going to plan. 3 weeks have passed since the mother hummingbird laid her tiny eggs.
The box that she's
It's a good year, and 2 healthy chicks have hatched. Blind and helpless at birth, the chicks grow explosively, doubling their weight in just 4 days. Bee hummingbirds are so scarce and their tiny nests so hard to find that this is a scene rarely, if ever, filmed before. 18 days after hatching, the chicks have already grown their flight feathers. In just a couple of days, they will leave the nest for good, and with luck, live up to 7 years. A whole new chapter in the story of the world's smallest bird.
The next one that we are going to explore is called the streamer tail. Have you ever been to Jamaica? If you have, if you go to Monteverde, there is a woman there. She's now passed, but she began to feed these streamer tail hummingbirds. Look at this tail, just an enormous tail and these bright red bills. And she got them to feed out of, she was feeding them out of nib bottles when we were there. And you can go there and it sits on your finger and you hold the bottle and it feeds right out of it. It is an extraordinary experience. So if you're ever there in that part of Jamaica, do look up this place and have that wonderful experience. But they are only found in Jamaica, and they feed on nectar and sap, which flows from sapsucker holes and the banana cuts in a flower. Also, when we were there, Robert Sutton was the primary ornithologist in the island, and he showed us a picture that he had pictures from David Attenborough's Life of Birds. In one segment of it, in the segment on the rearing of young and the mating of the birds, they show the mating of the streamer tail. David had been asked by, Robert had been asked by David Attenborough to arrange to have his camera crew be able to film the mating of the streamer tail. And he told them time of the year to be there, and they were arriving the next day. And he said, oh my God, how am I going to make this happen? He went to the local museum. He got a stuffed female. He put the stuffed female, tied it to a branch. The cameramen were ready. And seconds after he tied it to the branch, the male came in and took it. Now, they don't tell you that it was a staged mating, but it is certainly something. The story is spectacular. So I think you will enjoy that. The next one we want to talk about is the crowned wood nymph, and this is taken at Santa Marta. Remember that little island that floated from Peru actually up to the northern edge of Colombia. And these are crowned wood nymphs. This is late in the day. It's just last light. They're absolutely beautiful with all this iridescence and these feeders that can take so many. I mean, my hummingbirds this summer were so aggressive. My male just drove away others, but these were gathering and being quite hospitable to one another.
I'd just like to add a comment about the picture. I took this picture at night. If you look under me, you can see it's black. This was in Santa Marta, and there were floodlights coming down to light up the feeders. So when Dana starts talking about iridescence, as she's going to, remember this picture.
Okay, and this is the crowned wood nymph in my hand. Now, we were staying there at the El Dorado Lodge in Santa Marta, up quite high. And they, of course, it's hot in the noontime, early afternoon. So they give you siesta. Well, I left the door to our room open. And sure enough, this crowned wood nymph flew in. And so, of course, I had to capture it and hold it and take it outside. And that's how we got this absolutely stunning, close-up of this particular bird. It was fun. Another place we visited in Colombia when we were there was a place called San Francisco. It's a bit northwest of Bogota. And this woman has set up more hummingbird feeders than I've ever seen in my life. And she had, I think, 10 different species that were coming in. It was a narrow yard between her how apartment building and the next one. And here they are. It just was, and all the red flowers. It was quite exciting to be there. So look it up if you're in that area. Now, the next one is the booted racket tail. You can tell I have a fixation with hummingbirds with long tails there. Apologies, but so it's called the booted racket tail because here around the top of its legs, there are these white puffy feathers. And they call them boots, obviously, but it has this wonderful tail where there are no pinnae, the extra bits on the edge of the feather, and then out at the tip, these glorious blue shining pieces that it just float around seemingly behind it. And of course, notice it's feeding on this red tubular flowers. Hummingbirds love tubular flowers. Now the marvelous spatula tail. All right, another video. Look at this hummingbird. Look at that tail. How it can move through the forest, I don't know. This is north of Lima. Now it has 4 feathers, 2 long and 2 stiff median. And look at it. Just slip through the feathers. Now, there's a female that just came in there. She's doesn't have the tail feathers. But he just absolutely gets on a perch and just tries to charm her. And she is selecting who she thinks is the best performer. Isn't that something? We were there and they've set up a special reserve for you and to preserve this bird. They had to drag me away. I couldn't believe how this bird just mesmerized me. Of course, the music doesn't hurt. Look at her his iridescence in the crowd on the top of his head. Notice the bizarre flowers that he's feeding on. I think that tail would get caught. And notice sort of use spider webs to attach it to this fern-like plant. And it's the female now here. Notice no long tail, but she does have a few stiff tail feathers. We'll see her better in a minute. She's constructing the nest. Here it is, tiny. Young. See her tail, just the little stiff feathers there. Could have cut this, but I wanted you to see it. It's just spectacular. See how the feathers from the tail seem right at the base of the bird. I'm out there. All right. Now we're moving on. Research since 2003. We began to do the research and we began to look in our standard reference book, the Handbook of Birds of the World, and found that there was no information about this research. And we began to pull up papers Google Scholar was overworked in this talk, and we absolutely were enthralled by these topics that we'll now share with you, because this is not known. The first is this evolution of ancient hummingbirds. And Bob is going to talk to you about this.
Okay, this is going to get a little more complicated, but people said that they wanted a good meaty talk, and this is part of the meat. If you get lost in the thing, don't worry, we'll catch you up on the thing. There's several things about the ancient hummingbirds, not the ones that we have today. 48 million years ago, the hummingbirds split from the swifts. 47 million years ago, the first fossil was found in Germany. Can you imagine a fossil of a hummingbird? It existed that long in a rock? Well, they did. And so what they did, they called these very early ones that look something like our present ones, but quite different. Little different bills, little different wing shapes and all of that. But 47 million years ago in Germany was the first fossil that's ever been found. Now we go on to another date, 35 million years ago. Another fossil was found in the Caucasus, and this had, there were actually two of them, and this had the one key factor. When you think about hummingbirds, they can fly forwards and backwards. They can fly up and down. They can even fly upside down. How do they move their wings around? Well, there's on the hummers, there's a little thing like a very shining BB. And in these Caucasus birds, we first saw it. That is the way they make their wings go. And that is how they move from swifts into the modern kind of hummingbird. So that's a very thing. That was found in 2004. So now look at our timing. 2003 was the first one, 2004 was the second one. And now in 2005, 30 million years ago in Germany, some more fossils. But notice the name. Only a scientist would do this. Obviously, the name had to be in Latin, of course, and they named it the Inexpectus, unexpected bird, and it certainly was. Now, there was the best fossil that was ever found. It was found in France, and this was the last one in 2008. So you can see how the ages, none of this was known 20 years ago. They weren't even found. But here's what a fossil looks like. You may think it's easy. I've been a geologist, and it's not easy at all. This is a copy of the rock. The things on the left there is showing how the wings had developed pretty much into the way hummingbirds are now, is different from swifts. And so that was good. And you can see a piece of the bill over there to the right. Imagine seeing a piece of rock with that on it, about this big, and you were digging around in all of this area. So
And-
this is the difficulty of
And the
thing.
thing that he just mentioned, all those birds were found in Europe.
Yeah.
And where are hummingbirds seen today? North, Central, South America. Okay.
Okay, now
So-
we're going to work off of another thing that was going on. Jimmy McGuire, his first name is really Jimmy. That's the first thing that surprised me. Constructed a time-calibrated phylogeny based on some work and research that had been done at the very end of the 20th century. They had developed DNA and this sort of thing. And so Jimmy out in California in Berkeley, he has a team of a dozen people. And what they took is as many different species as hummingbirds. At this point, it was about 148 so species that were existing then. And they analyzed all of these in the system that had been worked out by the biology people at the end of the 20th century. And what it found is that he confirmed what the geologists had said as 48 million years ago, because it was in a rock that was 48 million years old that they worked on. But his system came back and proved again 48 million years ago is when the first hummingbirds, the ancient ones, came out. They call them crowned hummingbirds. And 22 million years ago, Jimmy established the fact that hummingbirds were in South America. Now, before Jimmy was around, if we were talking 20 years ago now, he's doing this in 2014, we would have said, Oh, they got to South America somehow, but he had to work out how they got there because a lot was known. As Dana just said, these fossils were all from Europe. Somehow they disappeared from Europe. There's no more hummingbirds in Europe. They're not even in Asia, but what we think happened, and this is sort of a stretch, I'll admit, we think they moved from Europe across Asia to up near the upper Siberia, crossed over to Alaska, and then down across Western North America, Central America, and down into South America. We do know they were there in 22 million years ago. Now, you may say that's a pretty far stretch. We have some other species that did this, so this is not quite as wild an idea as it may seem. That is now the accepted version of how they got from Europe to South America. Now, the next thing we've got to work on is why are they evolving so rapidly? As you're going to find out, there's an awful lot of hummingbirds, and there's new ones turning up almost every year or two. What's causing it? The first thing is, and the reason we talked about the Andes, that 10.6 million years ago, the Andes started forming, and they started to develop down there. Now, how do they do this? Well, as long as birds are all together and can go back and forth and mate and all of this sort of thing, they're evolving a little bit every year, and they eventually evolve. But if a group separates, this family now, or this group has separated, and there's two of them, when they can't get together, this one is evolving, and this is evolving differently. And when they get down so that these birds won't breed with these birds, then you've got a new species. And that's what's going on because the Andes offered so many places for these birds to hide and hence evolve. So one of the things is there's so many hummingbirds because of the way the Andes are formed. And this sort of 7% of the land is there, 40% of the species of hummingbirds are in the Andes. So that pretty much goes along. Also, the other idea of this coevolution, this was figured out again, 7,000 plants are providing nectar, different kinds of plants. And they evolved right along, as I mentioned earlier, with the evolution of the birds. So this coevolution certainly moved them along. And the last thing is, some of them came up to North America or crossed over the thing. Normally they don't fly over water, but basically some of the ones that could withstand more dry conditions moved up to Central and then up to North America. And ours sort of came in this family. Of course, when Panama rose out of the water and made a land bridge, then they were all following the land bridge, and that's how they moved into North America and the central area. Okay, now we have another one of these phylogenies, if you call it that. It looks the same, sort of like the tree of life, but there's several things I want to point out which makes this one interesting. First, on the right-hand side, you'll see a list of the 9 clades: topazes, hermits, mangoes, then go all the way up the line. If you look at the ones that the way it started, you can see down at the bottom how they come together, and there's a little circle, and then there's 2 lines going to the right. That shows the evolution of new ones. But look, another thing they show is the ones that have red lines connected with them and purple lines, and those represent birds from the Andes. You can see how many of these have that. So that's another thing that this thing did. You can see the word Andy and clade out there, that 1 dot, and how the number of lines going from that down. It shows how much they did. Now, it does another thing as you do it. In addition, showing the various clades in here, they have black dots. The black dots are birds that come up to North America and Central America, and the Caribbean birds that list out there, the few of them, are red dots, so they can show an awful lot in one of these DNA things. This was developed by Jimmy and his group. Now, just to give you, and this is the last thing I'm going to do on this thing, because you've seen in our 10 birds that we did, you've seen some of these clades, but I just want to show you 3 interesting pictures here. The first one on the upper left there is the green hermit. That was one of the earliest groups that were down on the list there. Notice the curved bill on it, and see how that curved bill fits so well into this flowering thing. Dana's going to talk a lot more about that. The ruby topaz is down at the bottom, and this was back in 1900. This was considered the most beautiful hummingbird in the world, incidentally. And I don't know whether you think the picture is very good, but anyway, this is a hummingbird that they used to collect them and stuff them. And when ladies particularly were wearing bird feathers in their hats and on their coats, they would have stuffed hummingbirds stuck on them too. And they were usually mainly these ruby topazes. Fortunately, they stopped that before they faded out. And the blossom hummingbird is still another one, and you can see that searching for flowers. That's an endemic to again Santa Marta, and we took a picture of that.
All right, now we'll go on to the next topic.
Yeah.
Hummingbirds did evolve a taste for sweets, but lo and behold, dinosaurs from which they descended don't have this ability to have this sweet receptor. So how did hummingbirds get it? And so this avian DNA does not contain a gene that codes for functioning sweet receptor. And then we have a fact that these most vertebrates perceive sweet and savory taste by expressing a family of receptor genes called T1RSs. And these savory flavors are detected in the T1R1 to the T1R3, in the sweet through the T1R2 to the T1R3. In 2014, again, not so long ago, there was a researcher, a young graduate student, Maud Baldwin at Harvard, and she analyzed the genomes of 10 species of birds and found they had no T1R2 gene. That's the sweet receptor. And then she did a second experiment, and she cloned the taste receptors of 3 species of birds: the chicken, the Anna's hummingbird, and the swift. And guess what? The hummingbird receptors responded to sweets. Their savory receptors responded to sugar. There were 19 amino acids that had been substituted in their T1R3 receptor. They had evolved the capacity to recognize and taste sweets. And then we see that the hummingbirds now need to have so much nectar in a day, so much sweet to solve their life. Second topic we want to look at is pollination through nectar gathering. Now look here at this particular flower. Down here in yellow is the nectary. That's where the nectar is. But out here on the tip of the anther is the pollen. So when the hummingbird's tongue goes into the flower to get down there to that nectar, it's brushing against the pollen. So the hummingbird can serve as a pollinator for the plant. So the plant gets pollinated and the hummingbird gets the nectar. And you can see on the right, there is another hermit with this deeply curved bird, and this one has evolved to be able to feed off of this flower to the left. Just amazing evolution there in that flower. We know that hummingbirds love red flowers, and you've seen them, I'm sure, I once had, we have a cabin right on the edge of a pond in Tuftonboro. And I had this moo on with these big red flowers. And there were hummingbirds coming up to me as I stood on my deck there thinking I was a red flower that they could pollinate. Also, just as a side story, there are many butterflies that are very, very good pollinators. And there is a species of azalea in the middle of the Appalachian chain here, which has these long stem anthers where the pollen is way out here on the tip. you can see them down there on the tip in the lower left there of these anthers. And it so happens that these big butterflies, this is a tiger swallowtail and this is a fritillary, they're so big that as they move in to gather the nectar from the flower, their wings are actually touching the edge of the pollen bearing part of the flower. And you can see pollen in some pictures on the edges of the wings. So they're serving as pollinators through the edge of their wings by doing this. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the hummingbird's tongue. This is amazing. Most of us think of sucking something up, like sucking things through a straw. That's called capillary action, where it sort of crawls up the wall of the inside wall of the straw. But the hummingbirds don't do that. They stick their tongue into the flower and they get down to the nectar. And at that point, you can see down here in this lower picture, there are little hairs on the edge of the tongue as it's expanding down here. And they come and they wrap around the nectar. They pull the bill back, the tongue back into the bill. And you can see here is the bill going into the nectar. And here are these hairy pieces on the edge of the open bill. And the bill then is the tongue is withdrawn into the bill and it squeezes the liquid out of the tongue as it comes back in. And then it sticks it out again and repeats it. So you can do this as many as 18 times a second. And so it's a very amazing form of how they've been able to actually suck out. It's really not sucking, it's just sort of capturing and pulling in and being able to squeeze it out. Wings that flap up to 90 times a second, heart rates that exceed 1,200 beats per minute. Hummingbirds depend on calorie-rich nectar for fuel. And this drinking hummingbird can flick its tongue into a flower 18 times a second. They easily consume their own weight. One has been found to have 14 times its body weight in a day. I mean, just amazing. They consume about half their body weight in bugs and nectar, feeding every 10 to 15 minutes, visiting sometimes 1,000 to 2,000 flowers a day. And why don't they get diabetes? I've had a son who's just developing diabetes, and I've been learning more about sugar and the human body than I would like. And it just seems to me here they are with all of this dependency on the sugar. But some of these levels that they consume could kill a human. But what happens with their sugar, sometimes some of the sugar, a lot of it comes in through the nectar and it goes right out to the muscles. It doesn't go in through the system and get stored as fat, get converted to fat. So some of it is burned immediately. And with the amount of attack that male hummingbird we had this summer at our cabin was using in chasing things away, they were burning up more than they needed to, it seemed to me. But they do have this constant buzz and this rapid heartbeat. So they are dependent upon getting energy into their wings quickly. The other sugar winds up in the liver, where its supercharged enzymes process them into fat. And here, this fuels their migration. As you learn, some of these do migrate quite a while. And when they can, those birds that are like the ruby-throated hummingbird that will fly across the Gulf of Mexico, it really stays on the northern side now at this time of year for a few days and builds up a great deal of fat in the liver, flies across the ocean where it has no chance to feed, living on the liver, the fat stored in the liver. It's just extraordinary. And now, as I said, their diet includes insects. And there was another researcher who found out how the hummingbird bill is modified to be able to actually consume insects. Now watch this in this video. The bird's coming down. See, the lower mandible drops down at an action. It sort of bends, making a wider gape in the mouth of the bird, so it's able to maybe be more successful in capturing insect, and then it closes it. And you can see as well with this stuff here, but here is this bird's bill bent. And it just is amazing how they've even adapted their bill to be able to be more successful. Iridescence. You saw so many of those birds. And with iridescence, it's not a pigment. It's a structural color. They're reflected by microscopic structural features of the feather surface. This structural coloration is the incident. It varies with the changing angle of the light, and the gorget is due to large stacks of melasomes in the feather barbules, arranged in layers separated by keratin. And they depend both on the Venetian blind effect and also in the arrangement of these. And I'll show you now. Watch this video. This is the birds that we'll see in the video. Their names are listed on the left. Okay, now here is our ruby-throated hummingbird. And notice how the angle of the light is so important in terms of when the iridescence shows itself. This is now the green crown brilliant. The angle of light is so important to how it changes. Now, here's the one that I was holding in Santa Marta, this violet crown wood nymph. Watch this, green crown brilliant. Look at that. Look at the top of its head. Oh, just glows. And now look at this fiery throated. Isn't that amazing? Oh. And then this is the Telemancan. This has been split from the magnificent hummingbird. If you saw it in Southeast Arizona, it's now changed. Courtship. It's very interesting. You may have seen it if you are watching in the spring. The male has this great dance. Let's go back here. Previous. He starts up high. He makes this loop down. The female is sitting down here, and he is trying to impress her, obviously. And he's coming down at quite a speed. His tail generates noise, so you can hear him. And when he's doing this, and he gets down at an angle where she is able to see the brilliance of his throat. And then he goes up and comes back and does it again. So she is enticed by this beautiful, particularly the gorget in his throat as he makes this dance. And it's interesting, in the Sibley Bird Guide, he has some diagrams of how the pattern of the courtship dance of the various hummingbirds in the Northeast differs. So this isn't the pattern for every bird, but you can see in these other experiments how the angle of light and the angle that he gets at is amazing. Now, torpor. Think what happens at night to a hummingbird. It's all day long, it's beating, and it's consuming all this energy-laden nectar that is gathered. But it can't do that at night. I mean, it couldn't store up that amount. So they go into this hibernation-like state that allows them to conserve energy by slowing down their metabolism, the heartbeat, and the respiration rate at night, particularly when the temperature drops. When it's cold, they can reduce that metabolic rate as much as 95%. They're basically on the edge of living. Some are able to adjust to living in the high Andes, and they can consume 50 times less energy by reducing that core temperature to support life. Look at what they look like when they're in torpor. Isn't that amazing? They have these positions. They're just, in effect, stopped almost all their metabolic rate, and they just are waiting till the morning. So we've really been sharing with you things from the Handbook of Birds of the World. There's a wonderful book called The Ascent of Birds. I highly recommend it, from John Riley. And this Jimmy McGuire, as Bob spoke about, is there with his work from Berkeley. Maud Baldwin was the young lady from Harvard. And then Rio Guevara and Margaret Rubega did the work on the hummingbird tongues there. So in conclusion, we hope that you've enjoyed this trip through the hummingbird families and all the wonderful discoveries that we've been able to share with you tonight. They're an exceedingly wonderful family of birds, and we've been intrigued by them. And I can't tell you how much fun it is. I don't care how many times I do this talk. It's still fun. And we want to thank Nora for inviting us, and Tin Mountain for hosting us, and to all of you for watching. We are very pleased. We're here in Tuftonboro in the summers. And if you have any feedback that you want to give us through the internet, please make note of that. And otherwise, your comments tonight would also be appreciated. And